everyone, and welcome to our 3 News Plus app. I'm Barbi Leo.
I'm John Thomas Kobos.
Now, throughout the history of Corpus Christi, discrimination played a role within many aspects of life, including public places, housing, and schools. Today, we will discuss discrimination against Mexican Americans within the role of education. Specifically, we wanted to talk about the significance of the Cisneros versus CISD case and the roller coaster educational journey of Hispanics here in South Texas.
Yeah, it's a really important topic. And our special guest today, Dr. Isabella Araiza, she's assistant professor of sociology and Mexican American studies program coordinator over at Del Mar College. She also has a long career as an educator, public sociologist, researcher, and activist. And then Dr. Sandra Clement, she's the deputy superintendent of curriculum and instruction for CCISD, and has served as an educator, a counselor administrator, campus administrator, all of it for over 20 years plus with CCISD. She's also been involved in grade levels, winning many awards and recognitions, was also recently selected for the Holdsworth Aspiring Superintendent Leadership Program. Lots of accolades, kudos to both of y'all. Thank you for being here with us for this very important topic.
Absolutely, we're so glad to have you both here. We want you to take us back prior to the Cisneros versus CCISD case, you growing up. What did you witness? What did you experience back then?
And so I was born in the 60s. And so I was born and raised in Robstown, Texas. And my grandfather and my grandmother both never spoke English. And though we were learning English from my parents, it was through my grandfather that I learned English. He lived right next door. They lived right next door. And so every night we'd sit on the porch. So I loved him. I still love him to this day. But I was remembering when, you go back in time and we had that conversation, I started reflecting, and it's a memory I always have, but I hadn't thought about it in a while. I remember when I was young, it was the late, mid-60s, late 60s. I was really young. I wasn't even in school yet. And I would walk with him every Saturday morning about a mile to the post office because my grandfather would go collect his mail in the post office box at the post office right across the street from H-E-B on Main Street. And I remembered that I was little and young, and we would be walking down the sidewalk to go up to the post office. And if there was a white family coming or an individual, we had to get off of the concrete sidewalk and step into the grass and look at the ground, at the grass. And he would tell me, don't look up, just wait till they pass and we'll get back on the sidewalk. I thought that was normal. And so I thought, okay, maybe in my little head, maybe they pay for the sidewalk. I didn't know. Looking back now and knowing what I know, he was afraid of losing his job. He was afraid of being hurt. There were just lots of things going on that a 3 or 4-year-old did not understand, And so I understand a lot about the things that he did later on in his life and all of the guidance that he gave me. Makes so much sense now.
Dr. Araiza, similar experience?
Yes. No, and not really. I was actually born in the early 1970s, and I grew up with my parents telling me that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And I remember being really excited about kindergarten, and I got to ride a school bus, and really early in the morning, and I was at the bus stop with a whole bunch of other children, and we rode the school bus. We stopped at a recreation center, and there were a whole bunch of buses at the rec center. Everybody got off the bus, and I remember them assigning us to another school bus and having like a little tag on me about where I was gonna go. And so then I actually rode 2 school buses. So we did like a little shuffling and then jumped on another school bus, and I went to Parkdale Elementary. And it was a wonderful, glorious experience. One of my best friends lived on the same side of town as me, and we're still friends to this day. But we were actually part of a really important historical moment in Corpus Christi's history, but also in our nation's history. I was a part of court-mandated integration here in Corpus. So, I tell my students that, we think about that discrimination as something that happened in the distant past, but it was actually just one generation away from them. And so the channels of mobility really were open for me, and I had a wonderful elementary school experience. I didn't know that this case had actually taken place, and I found out by accident. And so I really credit the efforts of the steel workers, Jose Cisneros, and the 23 other families that went to court to demand that schools be integrated in Corpus. And so, yeah, I think I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for them.
We're talking about the Cisneros versus ECISD case, legendary case. If you could give us an overview of the case.
Sure. I would like to say, though, that I found out about it by accident. You know, so when you're learning about racial and ethnic relations in sociology, it used to be just really about black-white differences. It's really important in shaping our United States history, but that history doesn't fit really well in for us. And here in Corpus Christi, when Brown v. Board was decided in 1954, basically what the school district did was they instituted a free choice program for black children. We actually had a dual education system here that persisted, basically where black children were allowed to go to other schools within their district. And so typically what they were integrated with were the Mexican children. Formerly, Mexican children were considered white children. Resources were not equitable. And in fact, it was actually a group of parents that were pretty outraged about the building of Moody High School in what was considered to be like the Mexican corridor. And the way that the boundaries were going to be drawn was going to make it a black and Mexican school. And so that had happened. The NAACP was actually filed a complaint in 1967 saying that CCISD was operating a dual education program, unconstitutional dual education program. Dana Williams, the superintendent at the time, said everything was fine, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare actually came down to Corpus and did an investigation, and they concluded that that was taking place. Now, at the same time that that was happening, Jose Cisneros had been sending his children to private school and then sent them to Prescott Elementary. And his daughter came home from school and was like, you know, the school's bathrooms are gross, they don't have doors on them, the lights don't work. You know, and she had come from a private school, was kind of shocked at the facilities, and went and complained to her dad. Her dad, to his credit, went to the school, talked to them about trying to fix those things, and he just kind of got brushed off. And he had made multiple trips, and finally the principal said, look, it's not going to get fixed, you just need to deal with it. And so Mr. Cisneros went to LULAC to ask for help, and LULAC turned him down. LULAC was also doing a jobs program that was gaining national prominence, and they saw what was happening here as kind of like a local thing. And so I've interviewed people, and they said they also went to Hector P. Garcia, and he was also doing things and didn't have time. And so Mr. Cisneros was a member of the Steelworkers, and he went to his union, talked to his co-workers about what was happening, and the union elected to sponsor the lawsuit against the school district. And so it was Steelworkers that put the money and the attorneys for the people so that we could challenge the segregation.
It's really interesting looking at some of those court documents where it talks about they put quote unquote brown, not having to do with black or white, so they were able to push it off to the side. But at the same time, you had all these families, soldiers that were returning from World War II, and so you had a new influx of people that actually had money, were creating families, and then there wasn't a place for them to live that was appropriate to the city guidance and ordinances that were in place. Another obstacle to have to overcome.
Right, and it was super interesting because we had been officially perceived as white or classified as white, and so what they had to demonstrate, the lawsuit had to demonstrate, was that we were actually an ethnic minority that was a racialized minority with different opportunities. And so the exhibits that you saw were actually birth certificates from individuals where it would say race, and they would put Latin American or Mexican in that area. So they identified the group as different than white, right? Whereas in the documents that Dana Williams was sending to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, they were basically passing us off as white in those documents. But our birth certificates said that we were a different race. And then they also presented restrictive covenants here in Corpus Christi. After World War II, Corpus was growing a lot, and they were developing all these subdivisions, but the deeds would say that these houses that were being built could not be occupied by people who were Black, Latin American or Mexican, Asian. Like the only way that we would be allowed to live in those areas is if we were there as domestic servants. So they were able to demonstrate we weren't allowed to live in these areas. We were relegated to these other areas, and then we were like drawn to be in those schools. And so we were able to demonstrate that. And I think one of the most beautiful things about the decision, was that CCISD was arguing that we were white students, and because Mexicans and black students were going to school together, the school was integrated. And the lawyers were able to successfully argue, and then the judge asserted that we were an identifiable minority, and that the protections outlined in Brown v. Board in 1954 extended to Mexican American children in 1970. But then he went a step further and he said that any ethnic minority, any minority identifiable minority in any community across the country is also protected by Brown v. Board. So our case is basically the one that said, no, schools should be integrated for everyone across the nation.
It's crazy.
It is, and it happened here in Corpus.
Yeah.
It happened here, and you were a part of it.
And I was a part of it, and I had no idea.
So when did you realize that this is what you were a part of?
So I'm super lucky. I went away to Boston College. I got my PhD in sociology. One of my areas of specialization was education. And I was able to get a job at A&M Corpus. And one of my colleagues, who was my former professor, had asked me to do a talk about Mexican Americans in education. And I was preparing my lectures, kind of looking through literature, trying to find material on Mexican Americans. And as I was reading material, I found a footnote, and you always look at the footnote. So I went back and I looked at the source, and it said Cisneros versus CCISD, and I was like, oh wow, that's like our ISD. Mm-hmm. Surely that can't be ours. And so I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, this happened here. Mm-hmm. So then I started going to the public library and at their archives downtown and looking at materials. I talked to my mom because the case kind of falls when I started school. My mom had no idea. She just knew that as a Mexican, she didn't have opportunities. When she had gone to schools that were Mexican schools, the quality of education was not as good as white schools, and she wanted better for me. So she went down to the administration building and was asking what she could do, because I was actually supposed to go to Solomon Coles Elementary. And she said that they just had to fill out a form. It was super easy, and that was the end of it. And so really just lucky, found out by accident that we were part of this really important historical moment for our community, but also for the nation.
Dr. Clement, I know you want to weigh in on this.
Yes.
What you went through too.
I love that.
Yeah, how do you reflect on that?
Yes, well, and when she talks about her mother, I talk about my mother as well, tells her stories to this day. She's still alive, blessed. But one thing, she only made it to 8th grade. She and my father both did. And so she talks about having been integrated. And she talks about, but in Robstown before, because there was only one school, so everybody had to go to the same school. But she said they didn't want them there, so they eventually started moving them to these, it was like a wooden, called the Bullard. She still remembers it. It was called the Bullard. It was on a corner and had a big fence around it. I remember growing up, looking back at it, and we used to have summer school there for Robstown. And I used to think, she went to school in these buildings, right? They looked like a prison. It had like a fence all the way around it, because when she attempted to go to school where there was an integration of sorts that I suppose he tried at the time, earlier than the Cisneros case, she said they were not wanted, they were treated differently, and so they ended up going to the Bullard School. So she always said, I went to Bullard. There was never a school named Bullard, but that's what she remembers it as being. And for her, that was normal. That was like, well, we don't want to be there anyway. So for all her life, she has believed that she is lesser for many years.
It's interesting when you look at the Cisneros versus CCISD case and the things that changed and how they integrated and tried to level things out, and how it did affect national levels. For you, how did it shape your educational journey?
Well, I'll tell you, as a teenager then, we're going into the 70s, I would say the behaviors of my grandfather shifted, because I spent a lot of time with him. And so, as you can tell, he started becoming very politically involved, which is something that is stark contrast to walking off the sidewalk. So clearly things happened from the 60s to the 70s. It started rising people's inner fight to say, we're going to, confront racial inequity, racial hierarchy in that part, the inequities of racial hierarchy. And so he started, there's even a picture where I'm standing with picket lights. You gotta go out there, Sandra. He would tell me in Spanish that he was all Sissy Farenthold. Oh my God, that's all we saw at the house. We had these big old picket signs. He was nailing them in the backyard with Sissy Farenthold because he wanted her to make it to the House of Representatives, things, and that was late 60s. And then we went into 70s and I started having cousins that that were way older than me that were now starting to run for political office. So there we were on a Saturday in the heat, handing out with these signs. And even then as a teenager, I look back and I think, you got so many things going on in your life as a teenager. I look back and I think, wow, we were part of a movement. And I look back and think how special that was. And he would always tell me, politics are politics, and they're important at the national level and they're important at the state level, but they're more important at the local level because that's where you live and that's where you live every day and it will impact you. And it always stayed with me. And he said, Mija, someday you're going to get married, you're going to have children. I want you to tell this to your children. He never said, someday you're going to go to college. Well, circumstances of life drive you to a place where you're a survivor. You're a survivor. You're just born and bred a survivor. I eventually went to school, started out in the medical field as a nurse. I started to do surgical type of medical work and I got that, and then I realized, hey, I'm smart. That was easy. I could do that program. That's cool. Okay. And I was teaching CCD at my church. And I fell in love with teaching. And I said, this is where I need to be. This is where I can influence our community by being a part of a child's life, right? By impacting that way. So I went to TAMU-CC and pursued a degree and ended up teaching regular education and special education in my hometown, in Robstown. And then moved into Corpus Christi and came here and taught it at Crockett Elementary. And then went to, started seeing there were a lot of behavioral issues with our kids. Even, we say there's all mental health, there's always been mental health issues, clearly more so now. But I wanted to be able to counsel them, to serve as, I felt like that was half my time I was doing that. And so I went and got a degree, a master's in counseling, came back and was a counselor, and I absolutely loved it. And then we had to share an assistant principal with another campus, so teachers needed help serving kids. And so I jumped in, my principal was so supportive. Go in and help teachers teach, help model, help them with instruction, help them plan. And I did, and I fell in love with administration. I thought, I will have a broader impact by reaching more kids if I work through their teachers, through their counselors, through all of the support staff to support them indirectly or directly. We all touch the hand of a desk, of a child. Yes.
And you continue to be part of that movement.
And I do.
Yes.
And so then I went ahead and did a second master's in administration and became a principal. And people say, why did you need to get your doctorate if you already had the degree you needed to be a principal and you're already a principal? I said, because I wanted to be better. I wanted the research to teach me something so that I could level up for kids. And I purposefully served on the West Side. It's just where I wanted to be.
That's where your heart was.
It was where my heart was. My gente. It's where my gente were. And I had so many great experiences as the principal of South Park for 4 years and the principal at Moody High School for 7. And actually got my doctorate while I was at South Park, while I was working, never slept. And so, but then had an opportunity to come in and be a principal supervisor at the district level as an executive director. And then my incredible superintendent made me the chief officer for innovation. And so I started overseeing a lot of district departments. And then last year I became the deputy superintendent for curriculum and instruction. And our support is to be able to provide a high quality education to all of our students, regardless what zip code they live in or regardless what race they are proud of being.
As an educator for so many years with NC talk to us about racial trends that you have witnessed throughout the years and where we are today.
Oh yeah, well, I look back to early 2000s when I became the assistant principal at Martin Middle School. We had the dual program, we called it a dual language program, but it really wasn't. What we would do for the middle schools is every middle school child who would enroll in CCISD, they had to send their child to Martin because we had that dual language program. So we had one teacher that taught them science and math, and one of our teachers taught them RLA and social studies. And then they went into all of their other elective courses with everyone else. And so the intent was that by being in these classes together, they would learn the academics, and then they would learn it with both English and Spanish with their teachers.
Cultural assimilation.
Exactly. But the only students in those classes were either an ESL student or either an ESL student that was either Mexican, it could be Russian, could be Asian, could be whatever. If they didn't know English, they came to Martin Middle School, and that's where they were required to be. So we thought it was a great program. You see something and you're thinking, oh my God, it's great. The kids, they're out there, they're learning, they're immersed and experiencing during their electives, but they're getting quality education in their core contents. Well, we had a little Russian girl move in, and I was in charge of that program. And so she moved in. The parents were missionaries, and they had adopted her and brought her back. Lovely young lady. We put her in the program. Now, keep in mind, everyone in the program were of Latin origin, except for her. At the end of the year, she learned Spanish.
I'm sure.
But she didn't learn English. And so that was the beginning of realizing that with an intention that was good, we needed to shift that back to allow our students to have more experiences with English-speaking kids rather than just a teacher. So they learn from their peers, and they feel more comfortable with their peers. And they needed to go back to their home schools to be able to do that. And that's what we did, and it has made such a difference. We no longer have Russian kids checking in and learning Spanish. And in the work of education, regardless where education is happening, whether in our nation or whether across the world, your intent is that you shift. You're a living program. So you look at what's happening to your students, you shift your practices, you shift your programs to adapt to that group or to what's happening within their experiences in their own lives. And that's one thing we did do there at that time, which was one of the best decisions I think that was made.
When y'all look at the cuts that are coming down from the federal level, changes to the Department of Education, and then trickling down to the state, what lessons can we learn from the past and from this case to today?
Well, I can tell you that the biggest, I think, factor has come with the attack on education. It really is, and on educators has been, people don't want to teach anymore. It's not their choice for a career. And so we struggled a few years ago with, like everybody else across the state, and I'm sure across the nation, with hiring certified bilingual teachers. The test is really hard, well, as it should be, but teachers were really struggling. They had found other ways to test, or if they didn't test in that, they'd test in another core subject or something, and they'd pass it and they'd go teach that. So what was happening is we had students across, and our emergent bilingual percentages were really growing, the number of kids we had, especially on the west side and the north side. And so we were like, okay, we don't have we don't have a bilingual teacher to teach these courses, so we have to submit waivers to the state when we're not providing from a certified teacher for students in elementary. So we knew that we were short, like, I'm talking 89 teachers. It was high. So we did some rework and thought, we know we've tried, we've done everything under the sun, and we're not getting them. And some of them are retiring. And so shifted. And we created these programs at schools where we had the largest number of EB students. We wanted them to have a certified bilingual teacher in their classroom. teaching them directly. So when we did that, we made sure students didn't live more than 2 miles from where they could go. Parents had the option, there was no requirement. And so they could send their student to the school, they would receive bus transportation to the school, and they would be served by a certified teacher. We did receive a lot of controversy over it, but as educators, sometimes some of the decisions that we make are based on research as well as what we've already tried and the situation we're in. So we plugged forward with the support of our board. And we did it. And I have to say, there were not many parents agreed to it because they wanted their child to have a certified bilingual teacher. Some parents did not. There was a minority of them. But a year later, we tracked those kids in comparison, not only to the rest of the kids, but in comparison to the ones who chose not to. That's remained with uncertified teachers, to which we still had to submit waivers for. It was incredible, the gains, the academic gains that these kids made. We received a state award for it because from K-12 Summit, because our kids on every measure had like grown 1-2 years with the value of a certified teacher. So that now we started having parents come whose kid did not attend, saying, I want my child to go there. And so it's been running super smoothly. We're no longer at we're a deficit for teachers, clearly, like everyone else, but bilingual is no longer that hard need that we had before. And our bilingual are our Hispanic students. And so that's only for emergent bilinguals, meaning only because our students who speak other language, it's an ESL program. But it was bilingual certification. And it just has, you roll the dice on stuff that you know in your heart from research and what you have seen and your data tells you is the right thing to do. So it feels good to go to sleep at night. No, we did what was right for kids.
Is there anything else you would like to see implemented in CSASD to help these students?
I think as we move along, there's a whole lot of, we see other people, other districts doing things that are novel, that work or don't work. Then we see a year later they take it down. We're watching very carefully. We've been interested in dual language starting up at some of our campuses. With the budget deficits, we're waiting for the right time. We're also waiting for the right research. We're still looking into it. We're not committing yet, but it's one of those things that if we're going to jump into something, we're going to be absolutely sure before we do. And it's also conversations that we always have with our Board of Trustees who are super supportive. But we continue to watch that, yes.
And Dr. Araiza, your final thoughts on all this and that history playing a role into where we are today and things we should pay close attention to and things we can adapt to maybe.
So I was reflecting on that question and listening to what you had to say, and as a sociologist, I tend to come to these things a little bit differently. In sociology, one of the things that we learned in sociology education was one of the areas that I went away to study. For every 1 hour that a student's inside a classroom, they spend 5 hours in a community. And so I think if we want to maximize students' potential, right, to have them in really rich soil, it's not just what we're doing in the classrooms, it's also what's in the community. So we need to invest in our communities, and we need in their families. Like we're all in this together, right? And so I think that we have to pay attention to that. The other thing that I think is really important is that we need to learn our history. I think people are a little bit afraid. I mean, the Cisneros case is something that we should celebrate. I would love to see a school named after that case. I've even tried to get a stamp for it. But I think we need to actually really embrace learning about our history as a community, the culture. There's been an attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I try to get my students to think about what's the opposite of those things. It's homogeneity. It's of diversity is homogeneity. Of equity, it's inequality. Of inclusion is exclusion. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing with our education system? We really should be celebrating the differences that exist in our society, in our classrooms. And if you look at a healthy ecosystem, they have lots of different things that are living and living with each other and helping each other thrive. And I'd like to see our schools do that too, because when we foster the growth of our children, that potential can come back and serve our communities.
Concerning the current political climate, as you mentioned earlier, what are you seeing as far as students' reactions and their questions and the feedback you're getting from students because of everything that's going on?
For our students, it's been more about wanting to learn about history. This generation right now that we have is so detached, just like, she said, is that there is a need for us to understand our history. If we don't know our journey and the journey of our ancestors, then we're destined to repeat it. And so we're, of course, as a public school district, we are mandated by what is required by the state and any federal rules. So we have to live into those. We do so. But I completely agree that as our students learn and live, I'd like our parents to tell their stories to them. We're parents, we're grandparents. Tell those stories, learn, teach your children, make sure they understand that it is proud to be who they are. They have come a long way through the lives of their ancestors. And we can't ever let that go.
We should celebrate the resilience.
Encourage the curiosity and celebrate
Yes.
your heritage. Ladies, thank you for coming in today and sharing. We could spend another couple hours just visiting.
Un
about this
cafecito, we're
meal.
gonna leave.
Yes, but we appreciate y'all coming in today.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the 3 News Plus.